Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Creative Assembly on multiple occasions has stated they are looking at improving various aspects of the game. They're looking at ancillaries, they're looking at the control system, they're looking at the corruption system. Those are the things that they're working on right now, beyond the campaign AI. Now, for my part, with regards to ancillaries, it's all well and good to get better ancillaries, but what I really like to see from Creative Assembly on the subject would just be a better system of managing them when you're dealing with a massive empire on the campaign map, because it can get a bit tedious having to micromanage every ancillary, every item, especially if you've got a bigger and bigger empire. It's fine enough early on, but later on, it does get certainly very tedious. I admit I am not the kind of person who optimizes this. Another thing in terms of optimization we could talk about is character leveling, automatic character leveling, because I'm sure, and I think I can speak for a good amount of people over here, that when it comes to leveling characters, for the most part, we kind of tend to go for the same choices. Or at least partially. Maybe we get different army skills or maybe different magic, but a lot of the skills we get, like we'll always get Root Marcher, we'll always get Inspiring Presence, we'll always get the special skill line. But having to do that every single time manually does add to the tedium. So that is something I would personally like to see them tackle, not just, oh, we're going to add more ancillaries or we're going to rebalance them in Warhammer 3. That is my perspective on the subject. Now, with regards to the control and corruption system, well, Creative Assembly has stated very clearly they want to tread carefully on the subject of both control and corruption because these are such fundamental gameplay systems. I would add that I personally think that both the systems of control and corruption have never worked very well in Total War. They were not invented for the Warhammer games. They were invented for Rome 2 and Attila, at least the modern incarnation of public order and religion. They used to work differently when you're thinking about, say, something like Medieval 2, or even Shogun 2 and all that, or Empire. They used to work differently, but the modern incarnations are based on systems created for Rome 2 and Attila. And they weren't great. Whatever one may say about Rome 2 and Attila, I think it is fairly clear that both those systems just didn't work very well. And they carried over into the Total War games. And for a long time, they were very annoying to use, to deal with as systems. With Control, you had the situation where if you were playing on a higher difficulty, but even on lower difficulties, you would get a lot of rebellions. And the solution, quote-unquote, to this was either ignore the fact that you're getting constant rebellions. Well, not ignore, but rather take advantage of it. So people would farm rebellions for experience, for money. It ended up being a very tedious process, however. Or, with corruption, yeah, you just either deal with it, or you would build structures for both control and corruption in order to tackle the problems. But that is not a great situation, because it meant that what we ended up having to do as players is build the same structures every single time in every settlement. And when you're building the same things over and over and over and over again in a campaign, that is not a great campaign dynamic. Similar to the idea of just dedicating heroes in a campaign to deal with the issues of control and corruption, just having them sit on their ass. That is not a compelling and interesting campaign system. Now, they did change control in Warhammer 2. They introduced a patch which made it so the lower control you have, the more you get in a province. So they removed the issue of permanent rebellions in a province. Maybe you would need one structure or something like that, maybe a commandment to deal with it, but it ended up being a much better system. Then with corruption, they overhauled the way the system works in Warhammer 3. Like, it worked based on percentages. That was not great. And instead, we now have a kind of situation where you get a flat level of corruption, and whenever you take a settlement with a faction, depending on whether or not you use corruption, you end up gaining a good amount of corruption through that. Now, I understand the sentiment people have. It's made the system pointless, but between tedium and pointlessness, I would rather have it the way it works right now. Especially because it's never been balanced. So I'm really skeptical of Creative Assembly handling the situation well. One of the reasons I'm skeptical is not because they can't improve it, they obviously can, but rather it seems to me that instead of tackling bigger issues, the lack of an endgame, the auto-resolve situation, the balancing between various races, difficulty balancing, maybe campaign customization, various AI cheats, you name it, sieges, they seem to be looking at control and corruption. Now, they say that a lot of people give them this feedback. Now, I watch the forums, I look at Discord, I look at Reddit. I can tell you, yes, people do talk about control and corruption, but compared to many other issues in the game, I would say there are bigger priorities for Creative Assembly. So my concern on this is that Creative Assembly is looking to tackle these issues, sure, but are they doing it because because they think they can better handle it than, say, sieges, which would require a lot of effort and a significant rethink, or maybe just outright impossible in some cases? Or are they doing it because they think they can do it on the cheap? And if they're looking to do it on the cheap, and there are limitations of budget, of manpower, of time, if they're doing it on cheap, I imagine it would be very easy for them to screw it over. Especially because not every race uses corruption or deals with corruption in the same way. Some races, like vampire counts, do need to have a good system of corruption. Or they need to have a redesign of the race. You can't just redesign corruption and public order in a vacuum while ignoring racial balance. Like, one of the problems for vampire counts is if they don't have corruption in a province, then things get very ugly very quickly for them, because then their troops take attrition. Also, it's tied to other things as well, like, raise dead and etc. Another problem with corruption public order is that you as the player, if you're playing on legendary difficulty, you get this -8 difficulty modifier to control, whereas the AI on any difficulty gets a significant benefit in terms of dealing with control and also dealing with corruption, because they have significant attrition immunity benefits. So if their rework is just going to end up screwing the player, whereas the AI will again ignore those penalties, which is, by the way, the case that happened in Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2 still happens. If that's still going to be the case going forward, I would rather them not do anything on the subject, because I think it's just going to end up being another level of frustration. I think having a system of corruption could be good, and I think having a more dynamic system of control that you can utilize would be good. But just consider what they did for Kislev over here. They added these kind of significant benefits if you have a very high level of devotion, control, in your provinces, including nullifying climate penalties. Then they added these invocations on both settlements and armies in regions. But you never interact with the system, really, if you're playing a Kislev campaign. One of the reasons you don't interact with it is because it only really matters on frontline provinces. That's another thing worth pointing out. Some people will argue, these systems will force you to play slower. They never did. In no Total War game where we've had to deal with these penalties have they ever slowed you down as a player. You would acknowledge them, you would deal with them, but the best way to play Total War has always been hyper-aggressive. Even in, like, Attila, when playing, like, the Western Roman Empire, that was kind of the exception to the rule, but a very, very big exception. But even then, it's not like you were just encouraged to just constantly deal with rebellions in that case. You were encouraged to go out there, destroy your enemies, establish a strong front line, sure, build up, etc. But it's never been a system that has really achieved its intended purpose. Then we gotta consider the fact that if you lower corruption for certain races, beyond just vampire counts, you consider chaos. A lot of chaos's control is tied together to their corruption. So, okay, let's say you gain less corruption when you're conquering a province. What, are we going to go back to the system of constant rebellions then? Or are we just going to end up with a system that's fluff and doesn't play an impact? Whatever redesign rather, has to take into account balancing. I personally think there should not be a significant balance difference in terms of level of control just based on difficulty. Maybe some benefit on lowest difficulty, maybe. Or maybe the system should work in such a way that you are encouraged as a player that you can handle it without a significant level of frustration on any difficulty. Because that's the problem. Like, I play games on higher difficulties, and I can tell you, there's some things I like, obviously. Like, I do want AI to produce powerful armies, to provide me a challenge, to have competent, or more competent-led armies. Sure, that's great. What I don't appreciate is when I constantly am penalized as a player just inherently for it, regardless of how well I play. So I think that is absolutely something that Creative Assembly does need to tackle. My point is that basically Creative Assembly redesigning corruption and control would require a level of racial rebalancing across the entire board. And this is the issue they've decided to tackle. So I'm skeptical on that. I'm not saying they can't do it. They can. But it's also very easy for things to go really badly. And I do question whether or not it would not be better for them to work on other systems in the game or other features in the game, like, again, the endgame crisis, the pacing of campaigns, objectives of campaigns. Like, if you want something that I think that a lot of people I think would agree Creative Assembly should do is redesigning the campaign victory conditions in a campaign to make more freaking sense. Because you have a situation on a lot of campaigns where the victory conditions are a bit ridiculous. So having a better and more improved system of campaign victory conditions, beyond issues like sieges, auto-resolve, casualty replenishment, economic balancing, racial balancing, races needing reworks, not needing reworks, I'm just pointing those kind of things out, right? In respect to that. Like, I think there's a lot of different things that Creative Assembly could do. The system is not perfect, but would I consider it a priority for CA to fix compared to other issues that I have listed? I don't really think so. But that is my perspective. It is ridiculous that Total War still is defined by Rome 2 and Attila, and I think that it has actually gone better when they've moved away as far away as possible from the legacy of Rome 2 and Attila. Now, there is an argument to be made on the subject that they do need to tackle this issue at one point or another, right? And maybe it's better if they do tackle this issue now as opposed to waiting for another Total War game coming out, because I swear, if I see this public order modifier in the next Total War game, that is gonna frustrate the heck out of me with it. I actually think, like, Pharaoh, I know a lot of people dislike Pharaoh, and there's good reasons behind that, but I think, like, Pharaoh dynasties did a lot of things really well. In the respect, like handling of provinces, building up your economy. There were balance issues, design issues, limitations on how big your economy could be, but the core ideas were great. It was just a question of implementation, balancing of things, and just a limited scope of something like Pharaoh. But with the CA Sophia team working more and more, and Creative Assembly dedicating effort on this, maybe we can end up getting some good things out of it, but, I'm very skeptical on this because I've seen what happens when Creative Assembly tries to do something with a more limited budget or something that they think is going to be more easier. Because that's what it screams to me. Like, they think it's probably easier to deal with this than some other issues. And it might just end up being a lot bigger. Especially when you consider the sheer number of campaign difficulties that we do have and how those affect corruption, control, attrition, economy, you name it, in a campaign. So it does seem like they're going for something that might seem simple, but it would blow up in their face. And I wish to emphasize, if what we end up at the end of the day is a system that just basically only works if you invest dozens of turns, that's a meaningless system. It's good to have long-term, to have longevity in a campaign, don't get me wrong on that, but you also need to have systems that just work fast, because that matters. I dislike the idea of the enter button simulator. I think there's a lot of mechanics that are great in theory, but they don't work in the game because of that aspect of requiring dozens and dozens of turns. Just an example of it. I know some people are going to disagree with me on this, but I think the entire deep system is completely redundant in Warhammer 3. Not because it's a bad idea, far from it. I think it's a great idea, but the balancing of it is clearly designed for a slower in-turn button simulator type style. So that is just something I would like. I would hope Creative Assembly considers more. Focus more on the balance. That would probably be my personal message to them. Just make sure you balance it properly. Because it does seem sometimes that they have this cool idea and they implement it, but they don't consider necessarily the bigger picture implications of what they're doing. That's all I had to say. Christine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And let me know what you guys think about all of this. Or what do you think Creative Assembly should focus on as a priority? Personally, I would like to see a better auto-resolve system. I would like to see much better sieges. Like, it's kind of funny on the subject of sieges. Other content creators I know who stream basically say, people lose interest when I play sieges in my stream. Because they're that awful to play and, crucially, for us as content creators, for people to watch. That should give you an idea. Like, how many people care about control versus how many people care about sieges? Or range combat, for instance. Or animation issues in the game. Or battle issues. Or performance, Like, I would love a performance update. Like, if we want to just talk about the optimizing game, like, could we have better campaign performance? Could we have, maybe something like DLSS add in the game? Just throwing ideas out there. Stay tuned.